Good morning. Welcome back to the Black Pearl. Super exciting, beautiful day in March, and we are going to go out and do some efficiency testing. So Black Pearl is an extreme long-range motor sailor, I would say. We carry 550 gallons of diesel fuel, which is a ridiculous amount, and that's a whole story in itself, but we do. And after a somewhat extensive refit over the last 2 years, meaning a new Yanmar engine, a new transmission, new propeller shaft, the whole works, we got underway. We're doing some things, and I'm going to blame this on Simrad. No, actually, I would blame it on Furuno. My old navnet started acting up. It wasn't plotting positions right. It was old. So I decided we'd put in a new multifunction display because Electrical 3 students were playing around with digital switching and C-zone and stuff, and this will do C-zone. So we continued the refit, new Cortex, the multifunction display, the radar, the whole thing. And down in the corner, of course, it gives me fuel economy, miles per gallon. Always wanted to do that. So what do? Well, two things. During the last haul out, we installed the new Airmar, I think it's the 812 or whatever. We needed speed through water because we have a lot of tides and currents driven by tides out here in the Northwest, and we want to know what the boat is actually doing itself through the water. So we added a paddle wheel, and of course we got roll and pitch and a spare depth out of the deal and whatever. And then we had to put in the new Maritron fuel flow sensors, which we did. So those things are super accurate, like 0.1% temperature compensated. Super cool. So now today the Skallywags are coming down. What are we going to do? Couple of things. One, we're going to go out and go through I made a spreadsheet. I'm a the data guy. Whole spreadsheet that just says different engine RPMs. We've got a TAC, an actual photo TAC to verify engine RPM. And we've got our speed. The bottom's clean. It's as good as it's going to get. We're up at about 2/3, 300 gallons-ish of fuel, I think. 340, I don't know. Anyways, this boat carries like almost 4,000 pounds of fuel. So 2/3 tank of fuel plus a handful of Skagit Valley College students. We'll call it good enough. The water tank's at half. Should give us some really good results. And then we'll verify RPM. We're going to do the actual boat speed through the water. We'll verify with the GPS as well, and then we will calculate, the actual consumption turned into distance on 550 gallons. Second test we're going to do is also super cool. We have this new Mark Grasser couple 100 amp alternator with the removed diode pack. Runs super cool. We're going to be running the wake speed through the app. We can get actual stuff, and check this out. We could get real data off from it. What we're going to do though is turn it on and off. The engine normally, boat running with everything turned on, fans, pulls maybe 20 amps. What we're going to do, we've got 2 battery banks. We've ran one of them down low, so we got a place to put all the energy. We're going to do 0 amps in the alternator. We're going to do 30 amps. And then we're going to go right to 200 amps. And 200 amps will basically be 180 going into the battery pack, 20 for incidentals. But we're going to be able to hold the exact, we'll do it for a certain RPM. We're going to be less than hull speed. We want to just be maybe 6 knots, trucking along. And then we'll go from no load on our fuel consumption up to, we turn on the alternator into that thing, go to 200 amps. We can take that difference of fuel based on our increase. We will know, it's a known fact on how much energy is in that amount of fuel, and we can convert that and figure out what efficiencies the alternator is, from getting throughput from fuel into the battery bank. And we are going to be able to say 200 amps of charging cost X amount in fuel. How much horsepower is it adding to this engine in a real life situation underway? Anyways, I'm all geeked out about it. So as soon as the Skallywags get here, we're going to fire this thing up and go do some sea trials. Can't wait.
Okay, I decided we should just start with the data and then we'll get on to all the other details. You saw the skip ahead notes if you want to see about the Maritron installation or whatever. But the crux of it is here's the data, and we did RPM from attack and the dash and the actual. There's the, and then converted speed, gallons per hour. Simrad automatically calculates miles per gallon when you get those two pieces of information in. And then I did obviously the range with my 550 gallons. And so there's the speed from, 2.5 knots at in gear and idle, and how much fuel consumption. And it went up, considerably there on the gallons per hour, but there's that sweet spot there, about 6.5 knots. And then this was interesting. This is a comparison between the actual RPM, gallons per hour, on a graph compared to what Yanmar produces. And it is 100% spot on because this boat is propped perfectly. We could get 3,084. We're within 100 RPM of maximum. That top data point is the only one that's a little bit off. And if we go and calculate based on that, the range goes from over 3,000 miles down to the sweet spot of 2,000, 2,500. And of course, if you run it hard, your range drops off. We know that with any boat. Okay, this is super cool. I don't know if I may have to voice it over, but if you take the cover off from your wake speed 500, we got the engine down below us. We got the Mark Grasser alternator. But what's cool is we go to monitor here, and we'll see if it shows up. We're running 13.4 volts, 27 amps. We're targeting 14.6, and the target amps is full up at 1,000. And we've got our temperature at 13 degrees C. And then we have no faults coming through. And so, how cool is that? This makes a great troubleshooting tip. Now, we don't have the engine running very fast. Once we speed it up, we'll see our voltage will increase to where it needs to be. And then I'm thinking I'm going to have to get a USB extension, run it up to the wheelhouse so I can access this all the time when we're underway. But I'll go speed her up and see what we can get for output. It's a little bit louder, not too bad. Now you can see we're still targeting, we're at 14.6 actual volts, targeting 14.6, and it's only taking 17 amps, 18 amps. That's just keeping up with my fans and lighting and stuff that we have going on. Sharp water. Because the batteries are full. But I have an empty battery bank that I'm going to turn on, and we're going to see what happens when we put a better load on this. So stand by again. Oh yeah, look at that, 167 amps. And you got to remember, that's what's going into the batteries, plus that, what do we have, 18, 20 amps. This is 100, it's marketed as a 200, 220. It does 180 really nice. And so holding voltage, it's at 14.4, targeting 14.6, so we're getting 100% field. Well, this is a look at the fuel consumption just based on the alternator. And so what we were doing earlier with that wake speed app, we decided to run the boat up at a pretty efficient actual RPM, 2100. And that was, we were getting some push from the current there, that's GPS speed. But you can see that we went from 1.7 gallons per hour up to 1.9 when we added that 188 amp load. So that's 0.2 gallons per hour. Now, diesel fuel has about 38 kilowatt hours per gallon of stored energy. So if we take the alternator at the 188 amps at 14 volts and do a little calculation there, we can figure out that when we turn this alternator to full speed, putting it into that low battery bank there, that we could get about 2.5 2.6 kilowatt hours is what we were actually using. Now remember, that's what's going into the battery. So there's going to be inherent loss because we don't with heat and friction and all this other stuff. And so, but if we take and use and do a percentage, if we're using that 0.2 gallons of that 38, we can get how much we actually used, which turns out to be about 7.5. That's significantly different, and I missed a decimal place there. I forgot to. We'll jump up here in a second, divide that by 1,000. There, we got that fixed. So 2.6. So 2.6 is about 3.5 horsepower, and if we divide this out, multiply by 100, we're going to get like 34% efficiency. So of the amount of energy, so we're looking at basically a quart per hour for 200 amps. That's what it costs, and it's only about 34% efficient, which is basically normal. We see this in all of our propulsion engines because a lot of the energy, the stored energy in diesel fuel, turns into friction, which is heat, and a lot of the heat goes from combustion, goes out your tailpipe, and all sorts of things. So it's basically spot on with what we thought, but there's the actual number. 200 amps is going to cost you about a quart of diesel fuel per hour. It's not that significant. We like to have the energy.
Okay, so what we're doing, start of our test, photo tack, going to hit the crankshaft, get actual RPM. We're going to go in the engine room and get speed through water with the Maritron DSM 150 display, and we're going to get the pyrometer for our actual exhaust temperature. So we're going to do this then every 200 RPM up and through. So down in here, we put a piece of reflective tape on the crankshaft, so we should be able to just do this and do this.
Now we are.
Okay, so first thing is RPM, 829 RPM. In here, we've got our Maritron speed through water and our exhaust pyrometer, which is bouncing all over, but it'll heat up. We're only doing 300 right now. So those are our data points that Jacob's going to put in.
So even though the new multifunction display had miles per gallon in flow, in order to make that happen, we needed two things. One was that new AirMar that we talked about, the 810, which I did the upgraded bronze through hull for, and that provided speed through water. And then this is what we built for mounting the equipment. You got to buy 3 pieces, 2 transducers, and the brain box, which is there on the right. I use an old piece of aluminum channel. The box on the right takes the data, temperature, fuel rate, stuff like that, into the box and converts it to NEMA 2000. And then it was plug and play box, send it right up to multifunction display. Easily programmable with the little Maritron DSM 150 or any of the Maritron displays is how you need to configure this thing initially, because
each of these has their own little coefficient, which I don't know if that'll show up or not, but they're both different direction of flow. And then we'll get a NEMA 2000 cable and run it up, and then with the Simrad we'll be able to get our actual fuel flow. So we're going to trim up the tie wraps, get the cable, figure out how much fuel line we need, and then get this thing installed. New fuel monitor. Where did we go? Down in the hole, of course. That's one of the things. So originally, I had plenty of dead space up here in the corner, and that's where the return line was. And I thought, perfect, we'll put the fuel flow supply and return monitor up there. Well, yeah, it would fit, except for there's my alternator blower totally in the way, and I couldn't reach any of it. Plan B was we had overhead clearance right here, so that's the supply, and the return is over on the back side there. And there's the little Maritron box. So we take fuel out of either rake core through that hose. That's supply. And then the return is on the back side coming from our Yanmar. So it's going to be a sweet setup. Let's go find out how efficient this boat is. Hey, we got some data.
Oh yeah, a whole spreadsheet.
She uses more fuel than I thought. It's a little chilly out there. I see some hoods and hats, but we got crew, you know. Well, that sure was a lot of fun. Now we got to go back to class and teach the afternoon lesson to the Electrical 2 students, review for ABYC exams. But Matt's engines class is going to be super interested in checking this out, as was I always told everybody this boat used 1 gallon an hour at 6 knots. And turns out it wasn't too far off. It's actually a little bit more than that. It's usually, I think what I was estimating before is about probably 5 miles per gallon type of a thing. So 5.8 knots would be 1.15 or something. But normal cruising, the easy, I call it, 6.8 to 7.2. I think I'm just looking at rough data. We're going to take this back up to my office and make graphs and run all through it and whatnot. But normally 1.5 gallons will push this boat regular cruise pretty easily. Of course, you can get all the way up to 6.5 gallons an hour with that turbo kicked in. The good news is I think the prop is perfect on this thing, other than it's not a feathering, but it's fixed. Which only affects it under sail, but we could get 3,084 RPM wide open throttle, and that's really good. So the Yanmar is rated at 32, 80 kilowatts, so 110 horsepower. So if I can get to within 120 RPM of max, we like that a lot. So it takes the range, if you were to really run this thing slow and of course put up a little bit of the canvas crossing an ocean, not even working at sailing, we truly could go probably 3,000 plus miles. But we realistically, if we wanted to do Robert Beebe style and just do 6 knots and not lift a sail or anything, we've got several thousand miles of range, which will cross plenty of oceans. If we want to get the big stretches, we would actually have to do a little bit of motor sailing. And that's on 550 gallons of fuel, so that's not bad. Stay tuned. We'll go back. We'll run some graphs for those of you that are into data like we are. We'll run the whole thing. The alternator was super interesting. It's an honest measurement of fuel consumption. We went to a normal 1.5 gallons per hour, 1.7. and run the boat, got our measurements. We turned the alternator off and then turned it on, put it into the big lithium bank. So it was putting out a true 188 amps, kind of continuous. Over a 15-minute test, it dropped 8 amps or so. But really, nice solid test. It went to 1.9. So there's our number. I can go back and play with that. Is that almost 200 amps of charging is 0.2 gallons. 0.2 gallons which means on this boat at that speed, by adding or subtracting the charging, we are looking at about 11% more fuel. And so is it worth it? Well, of course it is. We're already running the engine. To go from 1.7 to 1.9 is not a big deal. Now, if we're running it at an anchor, it's a big deal because then we're running about 0.4, 0.5 gallons per hour, and all we're getting is that little bit of charging 200 amps out of it. So that is not good. But when you're underway, that's a good data point of how much extra fuel it takes, because that's putting extra work on the engine. And of course, it didn't change our speed, didn't even really change our exhaust gas temperature at all. It was, it's an insignificant amount of fuel, but I love it. Good data points. Let's go back to the office, crunch some numbers, and I'll give you a conclusion of what we found out today, cruising around with all the Skallywags on Black Pearl.